The shit is hitting the fan in Russia right now. So, what exactly is going on? This is breaking news. Just literally heard about this yesterday, last night, even, as I was researching stuff for my stream here. Russia seems to be in the middle of a civil war. I guess you could call it a civil war. Like, what exactly is happening, right? So, the Russian military is kind of weird. You have the standard Russian military, which is made up of the FSB, I think is what they're called. I'm not sure what that stands for, but that's what their military is called. Like, they're the regular Russian army. Then you have this sort of mercenary group called the Wagner group. And the way it sort of works is this guy that runs it, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is the name of the oligarch who runs the Wagner group. And they're sort of like the non-standard military types. What they do is they've been used as shock troops, and they'll go around and they'll go to Russian prisons, and they'll recruit from the prisons. They'll take convicted rapists, convicted murderers, people who have 30, 40, 50 years, and they'll be like, you will never see freedom again, but if you join up with us and go to the front lines, you get to be free, and you'll get a pardon. And so people are joining. Some really twisted characters, really bad guys, are joining up with this mercenary group because it's like, well, then you get to get out of prison, right? So literal, like, fucking penal brigades is what they're called. This is the thing that you guys ever heard of Warhammer 40,000? Like, this is some shit you get out of Warhammer. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, penal brigades, that's an actual thing where they take them and they just sort of use them as cannon fodder. They empty the prisons and basically put them out there. And that's kind of what's going on right now. Like, people who have been captured from this Wagner group have basically said that they take you, they give you very little training. They give you a rusty gun that doesn't work. And then they tell you to run, like, head first into oncoming enemy fire. And if you don't do it, they shoot you. Like, they said, if you refuse to just fucking, like, run out there and like run down a machine gun nest or whatever, that you'll get blown away. And it is literally the exact same thing in Warhammer 40,000. Like, the commissar's job is to shoot the troops if they don't run straight at the fucking Necrons or whatever. Right? Or like the Tyranids. It's like, send them out there, and if they don't run, the men will be shot. Like, I don't know. Warhammer 40,000 is kind of awesome. Everybody should read it. Anyway, so that's what this shit reminds me of. It's fucking scary and crazy as fuck, right? And this mercenary group is actually effective. They've been apparently more effective than the actual normal Russian army. Because when the war started, the Russian army was not prepared at all. And they sort of walked in thinking that it was going to be an easy thing and that they were just going to stroll into Kiev in the Ukraine and just walk in, and people were going to, like, welcome them with, like, open arms. And apparently a lot of them didn't, like, they brought their dress uniforms thinking that there wasn't even going to be a fight. And then suddenly the Ukrainians start fighting back, and, like, the Russian army just got fucking slaughtered. So they were like, that's how the war started. Like, the original, like, engagements of the war did not go very well for the Russian army. And these Wagner dudes are the ones who are actually making progress. So there's a city called Bakhmut, which has been sort of reduced to rubble, but they won. And now they have to hold it and stuff like that against the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And they're basically being used as fodder. The Wagner group has apparently had, like, multiple casualties in the thousands. Right? I'm not sure how many Russian soldiers total have been lost in this war so far, but it's somewhere, like, I'm seeing estimates between 11 to, like, 20,000 is what I'm seeing, like, estimates of. It's just, these are all estimates, though. Nobody actually really knows. but apparently it's a lot, which is crazy. If you think about it, in Afghanistan, for example, the United States lost about 5,000 troops over the course of 20 years. So 5,000 versus, even if you take 11,000, like the war in the Ukraine has only been going on for about a year now. 11,000 troops in 1 year? I mean, pretty fucking bad. So the war is not going well for Russia. They're bleeding out men and troops and all that. And so what's going on is that apparently the leader of the Wagner group has had beef with the leader of the normal, ordinary Russian military for a very long time. And they've apparently always hated each other. And this also apparently has a lot to do with Russia's sort of governmental system. They're all oligarchs in Russia. So it's sort of like if you got Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and shit to actually run the government. And this guy is in charge of the military, and this guy is in charge of communications over here, and then this guy is in charge of whatever. Sort of like that. Like, it's sort of like if the Postmaster General actually owned the post office and wasn't appointed to run it, but he actually owned it himself. Like, that's sort of what the system they have in Russia is. Like, oligarchs who fucking run shit, and they're all beholden to Putin because Putin will kill them. Like, that's really the only reason why they're beholden to Putin, is because Putin will murder anyone who doesn't support him. But if they all got together, they could choose to overthrow Putin. And apparently that's what it is. So it's sort of like a feudal system, almost, what they have in Russia, right? It's sort of like a very updated feudal system, except instead of like lords and dukes and shit like that, you have rich fucking billionaires. And Putin is just, the king for life. Kind of what's going on there, right? So really it's sort of like this one guy, the lord of the mercenaries army, has shit with the lord of the normal army. And he's claiming, this guy, fucking President, what the fuck is his name again? Prigozhin. He's claiming that his own troops came under fire from the regular Russian army, which I could see that happening. If you had a political rival and you knew that he was in the field and you had a chance to get rid of him, especially a guy who's been criticizing you and stuff for years on end, I could see somebody taking that chance. Like, hey, why don't we just drop a bunch of bombs? We know he's going to be at this camp, and we could fuck him up. Or even if they weren't trying to kill Prigozhin, maybe if they made him fail by killing a bunch of his troops, then he would fall out of favor with Putin. And so I could totally see this sort of Game of Thrones kind of shit going on. But anyway, so Prigozhin is saying that the Russian military attacked him using aircraft to bomb his convoys. Also that they shot down a Russian helicopter that was firing upon a civilian convoy, which is a war crime. You're not supposed to shoot at civilians, right? He also said that the Wagner field camps in the Ukraine were struck by Russian rockets and helicopter gunships and artillery fire on orders from the leader of the Russian military, whose name is Germasimov. And this happened after a meeting with a defense military minister named Sergei Shigyu, when they decided that they were going to destroy Wagner. So whether that actually happened, the thing is, we know that actually did. Some did happen, that the Wagner group came under fire and some of their sort of base camps were destroyed and shit. But whether that was from the actual Russian military or whether it was from the Ukrainians or whatever, we don't really know. But that doesn't matter, because the guy fucking, I will never remember this fucking dude's name. Prigozhin. He basically turned his troops around and went back into the Russian territory and is on his way to Moscow to go kill the defense minister Sergei Shoigu. And they've proceeded to a city called Rostov-on-Don and have taken the military headquarters there, which is a big repository of equipment, military equipment and stuff like that. And they've said so far that they have not had very much resistance, that the Russian military is just letting them go through and stuff like that. But they've vowed to destroy anyone who gets in their way on their mission to go arrest the defense minister. That sounds like Civil War shit to me. Now, from what I'm seeing, because I mean, I don't know anything about this shit. I know nothing about fucking Russian politics, right? But from what I'm seeing, it looks like this is not a very fair fight. So this guy, the Wagner group, is made up of battle-hardened veterans who have basically spent the last year fighting in the trenches in Ukraine, and they're also made up with hardcore criminals and sort of very experienced military contractors, from what I understand. And the forces that are inside of Russia now, the military that are there, because remember, all the military's it's all in Ukraine, fighting the war in Ukraine. So the people who are left now are sort of like National Guard kind of units. But apparently these people, like, it's not a fair comparison to call them National Guard units, because you couldn't compare them to the American National Guard, because the American National Guard is more trained, like better equipped and trained. So they don't have shit, basically. And there's been lots of fighting going on. Like, there's videos and stuff up on TikTok and like on Twitter and stuff of actual engagements between these groups. So we know that there's been at least 2 direct like battles, direct engagements between the Wagner group and the Russian military. And as of now, it's developing, and we don't really know what's going to happen. I'm assuming that Putin is going to put an end to this somehow. The leader of the Wagner group, Prigozhin, is saying that it's not a coup and he's not trying to take over the country. He's not trying to depose Putin. Do you believe that? Right? He's saying that he wants to just go arrest this minister, this defense minister who opened fire on his own troops. The quote from him is, "This is not a military coup, but a march of justice, and will destroy anyone who gets in our way." So Russia has put out an order now to arrest Prigozhin. They've sent out communiques to his troops saying to detain him and stuff like that. The Wagner group is loyal to Prigozhin. They're not loyal to Putin. They're not loyal to the army. This is why you don't want to organize your armed forces like that. This is why you don't want to have a country run by oligarchs like this, because they're not loyal to the actual country. They're loyal to themselves. This guy's men are loyal to the Wagner group. They're not loyal to even Russia, not the government of Russia. So it kind of seems like this would be a very bad idea. I mean, me personally, I think this shit's overdue. I think Putin has been in power for far too long. Putin is a fucking criminal, is what he is. Putin murders people. Like, he'll murder journalists. He'll murder political dissidents. He'll murder, like, sometimes people who will, like, run against him every once in a while. They'll, like, have an election in Russia so that they can pretend that it's still a democracy or whatever that, or if it, they could try to claim that it's a democracy or whatever. And then if the guy running against him becomes too popular, he'll end up in jail somehow. Like, that shit happens all the fucking time. So Putin, like, disappears people, Lots of stories about Russian generals falling out of windows and stuff like that once this war started and things didn't go the way they were. So I'm all for it. I think this is great. I'm pretty sure that Zelensky and all the people in Ukraine right now are just popping their popcorn waiting to see what's going to happen. If they were smart, they would fucking, like, use this to, like, fuck it, attack. Right? Like, I guess there's already an offensive going on anyway, so maybe they were already attacking. But I would, if I was in charge of this, and it's like, oh, my enemies are fighting, good, let's kill all of them. Now's the time. Like, I would fucking use this as, like, opportunity, man. I don't know. I'm not a military general, so I can't say one way or the other what they should do. Just seems like a great time. When your enemies are fighting each other, it can only be beneficial for you. Maybe encourage that a little bit. Yeah. you know? I don't know. I mean, it's kind of scary because stuff like this can have a way of getting out of control. Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, hopefully it will lead to the end of the war in Ukraine. Hopefully that's the best outcome that I can see is that the Russians pull their troops out of Ukraine because now they have internal shit to deal with. Putin gets deposed, maybe exiled, maybe thrown in prison, something like that. The war in Ukraine ends and everything's cool. That, I think, would be the best outcome. But I don't know. We don't live in a just world. We live in the worst timeline ever. And shit like this has a way of getting completely out of control. So this is either going to be the end of the Ukrainian war or the spark that starts off World War III. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail. But we live in interesting times. I really, really wish we didn't. Hello, folks. A little bit of an addendum for this one. Looks like Prigozhin has turned his men around and the whole thing is now over with. And this is kind of the crazy thing when you deal with a developing story like this, is that things can develop really, really fast. So, looks like this entire little civil war only lasted about, 24 hours maybe? So, what's the story here, right? Well, Prigozhin was on his way to Moscow. He was pretty much unopposed and was there on his way to capture or kill the head of the defense ministry. And then he suddenly turned around. And he said his forces had marched within 120 miles of Moscow without shedding a single blood. This is the quote. Single drop of the blood of our fighters, right? And there have been around 7 engagements so far with the Russian military that we know, with the destruction of several planes and helicopters. So there was definitely some fighting going on. And the reports are that many Russian military regulars switched sides, joined with the Wagner group, and like police were letting him drive through, stuff like that. So he was pretty much just on his way to Moscow completely unmolested. And then he suddenly up and quits and leaves a lot of people wondering what happened. And the report is that he cut a deal that was brokered by the president of Belarus, who's named Alexander Lukashenko. And part of this deal is that the defense minister will be removed, Sergei Shoigu, whatever his name is. So this is a guy that had beef with Prigozhin. Like, Prigozhin really hated him for some reason, and apparently they've had beef for years. So he's going to be removed. The reports are that he's actually been arrested, but I don't really know if that's true or not. And then also the Wagner Group will remain independent and will not be beholden or incorporated into the proper Russian military. And that's what looks like that's what caused this entire thing. Apparently there have been moves by this guy Shoigu to kind of dissolve the Wagner Group and bring them under the umbrella of the proper Russian military. And this guy Prigozhin doesn't want that, right? So what this really was, it really wasn't a civil war so much as it was a fight between 2 oligarchs, right? Which really shows the weakness in this system of government, where people they're not held accountable to any laws or anything like that. I mean, they're basically just like a couple of warlords, right, who got pissed at each other and just started fighting, and it's like, well, the whole country just basically had to stand there and watch what happens. Ridiculous, right? Another part of this deal is that apparently the Wagner troops will no longer be deployed in Ukraine, which is a massive win for the Ukrainians, especially now that they have their counteroffensive going. All these troops are suddenly, 25,000 troops are getting pulled off the front line. So bad news for Russia, right? Bad news for Putin. And if anything, this little episode shows how tenuous of a grasp on that country that Putin actually has. That he's incredibly weak without the support of his oligarchs here. It's absolutely bizarre that that you would even see something like this, and it really shows just sort of how just ridiculous and vulnerable that country actually is. And I think this is kind of putting the nail. I mean, I don't know. I don't. Who knows what's going to happen? Will Putin end up getting ousted because of this? Who knows, right? Maybe he might hang on to power. He might not. Nobody can tell the future. I think this does show very well, though, that this may be the turning point which ends the war in Ukraine and humbles Putin and destroys Russian hegemony in that region for a long time, which I think ultimately will be a great thing for just the world, for mankind in general. So anyway, folks, that's all I got. Adios. Hello folks, if you like what I do and you want to support the channel, please consider buying something from my Etsy shop, supporting me on Patreon, liking and subscribing, and checking me out across my social media links listed below. Thank you all so much, and see you next time.